24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Middle Path Radio, your Islamic companion.
Tonight we will be discussing why most of the Muslim world is affected by dictators. It is a reality which may affect us in many ways. Lord Acton once said, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." Our special guest tonight is Brother Abdul Samad and Brother Khairul Islam. They are regular contributors to the show. Assalamu alaikum, brothers.
Wa alaikum salam.
Let me start with Brother Khairul. Brother Khairul, why is it that most of the Muslim countries are in chaos, decline, full of corruption when it comes to ruling and governance? No justice, technologically very backward.
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Khalid. It's nice to meet you, and welcome to all our guests that we constantly hear on the radio with us. I hope there's going to be a very lively discussion with myself and Brother Samad, inshallah. I think before we even discuss why, I think we need to just give a backdrop of the situation in the Muslim world, and I think we don't. Everyone knows. We don't even have to even talk about the situation. We can see the kind of situation that they are facing. The Muslim world is blighted with wars and poverty and a violation of any kind of rights. There's no rights for the humans within any of this area. Whether you look at in terms of the people, the suffering in terms of food or any kind of needs are not satisfied. In terms of literacy, in terms of education, they're very illiterate, backward in all of those sense. In terms of progress, and also, like you said, dictatorships has taken over in most of these countries. There's no political transparency. There's ethnic conflicts in that region. There's regional division. There's so many different nations, and every one of them fighting with every other. And these conflicts seem to constantly increase. There's the number of conflicts seems to constantly increase. I was looking at the most corrupt nations in the world, and of the top 10 corrupt nations, 7 of them turned out to be Muslim nations. And the rest of them follow very, very fast. There's just a few here and there that are not Muslim nations. So we can see that is the situation of the Muslim countries within the Muslim world. And I think that's what we would need to look at in terms of the reality that we're discussing. As to why that's that situation, there's many causes, and we can go into each of those causes. Partly, I would say, it's because there is a separation between the rulers and the ruled, and there isn't a harmony like you see in the West. So in the West, there is a system in place, whether it's democracy or capitalism, where the people generally agree with the leadership in terms of the direction of the country. Whereas in the Muslim world, we have a detachment between those who are leading, dictators, and even those who are so-called, come through democracy, like Hasina or Nawaz Sharif in Pakistan. Yet there is a detachment between what they rule by and what the aspirations of the people are in those countries.
I mean, maybe, Brother Abdul Samad, you can probably give us some example of this detachment. I know Brother Khairul is saying there is a detachment.
Yeah,
what does it mean by that?
Yeah, well, detachment in the sense that I think it's important that we look back to history, actually, with any topic such as this. The whole philosophy about the rule and governance in a society is one that has to represent the people, their values, their belief system, and their ideals. And really, a leadership needs to emerge or needs to be appointed through whatever method by which they can organize the society's affairs. So really, everybody in the society is actually a partner in this whole thing. And that's the philosophy. That's how things ideally should be. Yeah. Right? Now, when we're talking about the Muslim world, we need to see, we need to see the historical events that happened, in the Muslim world over the last 200-300 years, and you will find that really Muslim world has been under foreign occupation, meaning that the laws, the governance, the systems were actually managed by foreigners, and the people were not actually partners in this.
So what you're basically
we're talking
saying,
about we're talking about the colonial era, for example. When Europeans went out dominating the entire globe, and that unfortunately that's the reality. Now, if you want to understand, like in that time period, what you found is that, say, the British, when they controlled India, they had a system by which they had appointed indigenous people to not represent the people, but represent the colonizers' interest over these people. Do you see?
Okay.
So there's a system there in place which is already in violation of this whole philosophy about ruling and governance. And it's from this situation that the Muslim world is emerging. So that's the historical backdrop. Now the question is, has that reality changed at all? Is the real question. Is the Muslim world really, become free from its historical political reality and situation? And I would argue that it hasn't. The reality is that the situation has remained the same, where the common people have no say in the political process, or in determining what the law, what the governance, and how the society should be run. So in that sense, it hasn't changed at all. And I think when we understand that, then we can really, discuss deeper in terms of how we should approach such situations, these problems.
That's very interesting that you raised that discussion, because any country, what happens is either through revolution or some kind of empowerment from the people, where actually things change for them. So we saw, like you were telling us, that there was a period when the whole of the Muslim world was under colonial rule, and then you had the British Mandate. So those who were not under colonial rules, they took those countries because of the destruction of the Ottoman Caliphate, and it came under British and French rule. And what's happened since, where it seems like countries have got independence and they've got their own people ruling, the colonial powers still have kept their foothold in those lands and largely control who comes to power and who doesn't come to power, what the direction of the country goes, because you have to look at the mindset of the colonial powers, and that hasn't changed. And that is, let
me stop you for a second, because when I visit these places and I see people are very politically active. They're going to the booths, placing their votes, and it seems like it's the people that are electing the rulers. And what you're telling me now, it doesn't seem the case. So it seems like people are participating in the democracy, and hence Hasina gets elected. So you're saying that.
So you're talking about, for example, Bangladesh is an example of Bangladesh. Now, what you could look at is what are the options available. We looked at America, for example, and we saw people really didn't want Donald Trump, and also they didn't want Hillary Clinton. But the only options that was available to them were these choices. So you find in those countries, in the Muslim countries, where seems some kind of choice, Islam is not on the table. And we saw how Hasina came in and destroyed the opposition into one party. But on top of that, where they were given some kind of autonomous, some kind of freedom in terms of finding a ruler. For example, what happened in Algeria, where they did elect, in the preliminary rounds, elected by over 90% a Muslim party to power. Straight away France went in and took power by force, because at the end of the day, like I was saying earlier, you need to look at the colonialist powers. All they have in their mind is their interests, and as long as their interests are fulfilled, Yeah, that's most important. So they have no problem.
But that
with dealing with-
that was in the past, where the colonial powers went into the Muslim
Well,
land.
let's look at
took
No,
the
no, no,
resources.
no.
Let's look at Egypt
What,
now.
what
Can I come in?
resources,
Let's
what
look at-
resources are they taking out? They're not really taking any resources, are they?
Let's look at Egypt now, for example. Yeah, we had Sisi who come to power by force. We didn't see the Western world, the colonialist world, up in arms saying, how come Sisi has taken power from a legitimately elected Morsi? Did we see that? I didn't see that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing we need to understand is that what we had in the past. So, like for example, historically under direct colonial rule, you didn't always necessarily have like your non-native people in the office. You had the locals, and they were the Nawabs, they were the Rajs, they were your color, they were the of the indigenous. But they were representing who? They were representing the colonial powers and their interests in order to secure their house, if you know what I mean. Their share of control over the people and over the resources.
Okay.
So what we're saying is that what has changed is that those titles have changed to presidents and prime ministers and ministers. And the process of historically maybe a direct appointment has been now changed to so-called elected process. And in areas where direct electoral processes may fail to achieve the objectives, we will find direct tyrants like kings. And do you understand? Or presidents that seem to remain in office for decades on end, yeah? So in truth, so what we're saying is that really it's how this whole colonial objective is slightly different now. But the issue is, so I mean, I term this new reality as neo-colonialism.
But you have in these countries, you have your own army, your own military arms and stuff like that, and you're still saying this goes on. But
so
before we had, let's say we had the colonialists and the foreign armies in those lands, but
not necessarily. This is the point. This is what we need to understand. Even historically, what you found is that you didn't have millions of British soldiers to maintain, this entire continent of India.
So why wouldn't
so the question is, how did they manage? How did they manage to dominate and control and make sure that they, rule over these lands? It was the indigenous, what they done. It's all down to system. And this is what we need to start looking into in terms of what are these systems? Are these new so-called democratic systems any different from systems that we had maybe, 100, 200 years ago? Do you see? What objectives do these systems adopt? Did the people of these...
Well, classic example that we went through recently was, let's say, Afghanistan. We had America going in and removing the leadership that was there at the time, which were the Taliban, yeah, which was seen as generally, even though maybe very repressive, was from the people. And then a person was installed who Hamid Karzai was installed. He was an employee of an oil tycoon, and they knew that he's a person that will play their games, the American game. So there was no elections or anything like that. He was installed. What happened after that? Effectively, the ruling class was decided who are going to be the ruling class at the time, and in terms of military, in terms of so. And then after that, even if you allow the elections, the options that you have will be those that are in favor of American interests. So even now, you have Ashraf Ghani, who's in power over there, yeah? And now Ashraf Ghani is a direct descendant, if you like, from that ruling class, which has been created so that American interest would be served.
Secured.
So if you have this line of thinking, and you go follow on and on, if nothing has changed in terms of revolution, effectively, you have the same. But one thing that happens within those countries, and which you see, for example, in Yemen, is amongst the colonialist leaders, they have their differences, and they try to influence different political class within those countries. Then so that those countries become more favorable to them. So we find wars, for example, in Yemen, where the old Ali Abdullah Saleh was a more British stooge, and then you've got the new person who's Mr. Hadi, which is more American, where you have a conflict between those in that nation.
Okay. So I mean, what I would maybe add is that what you have in terms of a political process in these countries, in the Muslim world, if they're seen to be democratic, then all it means is that these are, all the political parties are simply running for agencies on behalf of certain foreign powers.
Yeah.
Do you see? Now, whichever political party or group
goes into power,
they're all agencies of foreign powers, and in the process, you get the people that do participate without really realizing the whole process, or what it would really deliver, and what it they want to get involved, they do get involved, and then they realize nothing seems to change, and it requires a deep analysis and understanding, and really looking at the whole system itself, in order to realize that.
Going back to Bangladesh as well. If you have a look at Hasina, just before Hasina came to power, she was in Washington, meeting the American leadership there, because it requires. Well, Hasina at the time, it wasn't Mr. Trump.
Okay.
It was before that.
More recent then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now it was Bush, I believe. But what's it called? The thing is, you find that even Khalida, goes to America to try and convince them that she can also rule.
She can also do a good job on behalf of the American administration. Do you see?
So it's like that. So
they're all fighting for agencies. They're not really fighting for the people.
So how do these agencies secure this? I mean, the people in these lands not aware. Like you say, looking into, like, let's say, for example, Bangladesh, for example, when Awami League, for example, the current ruling party in Bangladesh, has a history. And when we look at its history, we see it's gone from stage to stage, not probably in a positive light, but in a, negative light, where the bar just keeps going down. Mm. So I was thinking, what is in the interest of these rulers? How do they benefit? Yeah. And what are the means? Yeah. Maybe through IMF or something that
I think, so this is, you have to look at how it's manipulated and how this control is kept. So there's lots of institutions that is used. For example, the United Nations, where you have the 5 permanent members, and all other members have to obey whatever the United Nations does, and only those 5 permanent members have veto over those. And then you've got the IMF and the World Bank, and then you've got the bilateral agreements, and then you've got the trading can only happen via the dollar. All of those kind of institutions that you have, and these institutions, what they do is, this is how you maintain the influence, and also the debt, the national debt that they have to constantly repay. Through those kind of institutions, what you can do is you can manipulate who can benefit, and for the agency, they're acting like agency. So in the sense, what can they make in terms of their wealth increase? So this elite class, there is a fight between the Khalidas and the Hasinas in terms of when they get to power, they can earn rewards from America or Britain.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a fight between BNP and Awami League, and whenever Awami League goes into, it's a revenge for her father, I suppose.
It's not even that, actually. It's all about.
But that's what they feed on the people, isn't it? They keep them busy rather than what you said earlier.
So
we entrust the people entrust them with a certain role and responsibility, which is never.
I'll say one thing. Yeah, in the Muslim world, generally, you'll find that there is a deep decline in political culture amongst the people. So they don't understand some basic principles of governance. They don't understand their relationship with the establishment. They don't understand their relationship with the people that are ruling over them. Do you see? They don't seem to understand the true objective of ruling and governance. So, I mean, you can talk to somebody and their analysis, their understanding of whether, say, Bangladesh is progressing or not, will be so simplistic. It will be like, yeah, this government is doing well because now we have more roads. It's as simple as that. Do you see? And that seems to, because in their understanding, this is what it is. This is what ruling is. They don't understand, say, law and order. They don't understand, rights and responsibilities. They don't understand accountability. They don't understand, foreign policy, values, ethics, because all of these things are necessary and part of ruling, as well to understand our relationship with the authorities. So, I mean, a very simple concept, if you like, is that really anybody who's appointed to rule over a people is actually a civil servant. It's actually a servant of the people. And historically, you will see that this has been demonstrated, in Islam, that the rulers, when they were appointed, if you look at Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, if you look at Umar bin Khattab, you look at these people and they understood their role, and they proved that this is what they were. They felt responsible as servants of the people, and people did not refrain from accounting them. No. Can you imagine? These are the rulers, and the people are accounting them. And what you find is that there is a lack of political culture. And what I want to add is that really the responsibility, a primary responsibility of any political organization, a political movement, is to really educate the people about what politics is and what governance is, and the rights and the responsibilities. Do you see? Now you'll go to, you'll see in places like Bangladesh, you'll see, the governments are completely untouchable. Do you see? If you go to Pakistan, if you go to Egypt, if you go to anywhere, they're just untouchable. The people don't even feel that they have the right to account them. Do you see?
Yeah, I mean, but that's on the other side. You have kingships as well in the Muslim lands, and that wasn't always there, was it? This is only about 50, 60 years old.
See,
this you need to look back to the history. Yeah. One of the things that was mentioned is the Sykes-Picot Agreement. As a result of Sykes-Picot Agreement, we had certain countries, and these were split into different borders, which really has no relevance and relation to the people, the way people were living. So if you look at Iraq, you had the Kurds, you had the Shias, and you had Sunnis made into one country. Or if you look at Syria, these are all irrelevant. It's just the borders which is not natural between the people. Yeah, no. And these are the borders that were created just so that it allows control over these regions. If you're talking about the Hijaz and the kings that were created, these were the people that sided with the British against the Ottoman Khalifa in Turkey, and as a reward they were given certain regions to rule. In fact, they were given more. They were given they were going to be given an Arab state for all of the Arabs. But obviously, we know the British. Yeah, they had promises with the Jews. They had promises with the Arabs. Yeah, of Hijaz, and then they had their own agreement with the French. Yeah, which is Sykes-Picot Agreement that they had. So they had many agreements. Yeah, and each of them contradicted the other. But why? Because it's all about interests. That's all it is, about interests, and it's all about keeping them divided. And the whole thing, I think, if you look at Japan, for example, yeah, or even Germany, the colonialists have no problem with giving some kind of autonomy to the people, if those people made the choices that they wanted. The problem is the Muslims, they have an alternative way of thinking. Their alternative is in more of an Islamic system. So every time where Muslims were given a choice, That's why I brought up Algeria before. But even Egypt, if you have a look at
recently
Egypt,
in the Arab Spring, obviously,
in Egypt, I'm not talking about the Arab Spring at the moment, but or even if you look at Turkey, what's happened with the coup, the only reason the coup was overturned is because of the Islamic sentiments within the people. And the only reason Erdogan is in power is because people see Erdogan, even though he's just camouflage Islam, meaning he's just cosmetics. But people see Erdogan as someone who's standing up for Islam and Islamic values, and that's why he was able to overturn the coup that's just happened recently this year. So any situation where the Muslims are given some kind of autonomy to choose their own leadership, they choose Islam again and again and again. And this is a problem for the capitalists, for the colonialists. The reason it's a problem is because any Islamic system, any Islamic leadership will have to protect the Ummah. Will have to protect the Ummah and will prevent exploitation of these lands. If you look at, I was looking at, the growth, the division in growth in terms of the wealth concentration. And we know 10% of the people in the world are in charge of more than 90% of the wealth. Where is this 10%? We're talking about Europe, America, Australia. That's really it, just those regions. And how is that possible? The reason it's possible is because in the rest of the world, where you have the leaderships, they are under your control. You are able to go in and out, exploit those resources. And obviously, this is the problem within the Muslim world, giving them their own autonomous choice in terms of who rules. And we found wherever this kind of situation happens, they are willing to work with dictatorships easily.
So what I'm gathering from you brothers at the moment is like democracy is promoted by the Western governments as an antidote against dictatorship and corruption. And when the people will get like really be really suffering with dictatorship, then they will say, you have a choice. Now you can go to the voting booths and have a choice. And when someone goes into power that is not going to serve or secure their interest, then all hell is loose.
I think it's important to really make a distinction between the system and the person or the party that is being appointed. There's a problem. There's a fundamental problem with the system itself, because the system itself is not from the people.
In those lands,
in those countries, the systems are actually not from the people. These systems have been devised, designed, overlooked by foreigners, by foreign powers. I mean, it's ironic. I mean, if you go to Bangladesh, for example, when it comes election time, as an example, you will find that there's UN observers, US observers, Australian observers, Canadian observers.
Lots of observers.
There's so many observers overlooking the whole process. Now, I mean, I haven't seen Iraqi observers or Bangladeshi observers or Egyptian observers in America at this election. Now, what does that say? That goes to show that really a truly independent sovereign nation understands the whole concept of sovereignty, whole concept of independence. What you find in places like Bangladesh or Pakistan or other countries, they're truly not independent, and what they have is some pseudo independence, false independence, to really fool the masses, and the masses then just get engaged and whatnot. But in truth, you will find it's those people who are observers are actually the policymakers. Those people who are actually dictating the terms and conditions of even the whole process. Should it not go in accordance with their interests, they will say, "Oh, this election is null and void. It's there's too much corruption and too much this and too much that has happened." Do you see? So so really, I mean, are you is the nation independent? Now the question is, has the people been consulted of what sort of process, what sort of system, what sort of rule? Have the people been consulted? And the truth is that it hasn't. Now, the other point I want to maybe bring in is that democracy is just a facade in the Muslim world. This is what it is. Democracy is just a facade. The way, when a nation truly heads towards Islam, we find that democracy is put to halt and immediately interrupted and replaced. This is why you will find in places like the Middle East, in places like, you know, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and they understand very well that these are places that they cannot secure their interest through any democratic process. And like the Prophet mentioned earlier, Algeria has proven that. We've seen Hamas, you know, win election and immediately it has to be abandoned or isolated from the international community. We find in Egypt, Morsi comes into power through this whole process, and then immediately, you know, the American-backed dictator creeps into the scene and takes over without any hoo-ha, any raising of eyebrows from the Western nations. So this is the point. The point is they and what you find in places like Bangladesh now, for example, and Pakistan, is that it's slowly moving towards a dictatorship, overt dictatorship. Whereas before you had, through this electoral process, you had dictatorship, but now you will have direct dictatorship, because they understand the sentiments of the people and the demands of the people are changing more in favor of Islam, with more clarity and realization of what Islam entails, and that is the ideological independent Khilafah state. As the call grows for this sort of change, you will find naturally it has to move towards a form of dictatorship, because that's the only thing that can sort of like suppress the feeling and the emotions and the demands of the people.
There was a message in from one of our listeners. The question is to Brother Abdul Samad: if the people are not happy with their leaders, why can't they get rid of their rulers? Probably you can share.
Yeah,
some
well,
light
why can't they get rid of it? Inshallah, they will get rid of those corrupt.
But they tried, isn't it?
Of course, I mean, we've seen Arab Spring. I mean, what was that? That was a very clear demand of demanding a change in the ruling system. But really, how much support did the masses get from the so-called the lovers of democracy and spreaders of peace and all this? You know, we see no. We see no support. Rather, we see, on the contrary, we find these people who talk about democracy and preach democracy to the world are actually backing not the people. They're actually backing these tyrants and these dictators, and funding the armies to suppress their own people. You know, so in this situation. So, but I look on the positive. I see that the people are right. You know, opening their eyes, they're realizing the corruption, they're realizing the facade of democracy and all the rest of it, and they're demanding a change. And inshallah, we will see a change very soon. We'll see.
If I could come into this discussion, Brother Khalid.
Yes, sure.
We started off saying, how the situation of the Muslim world is dismal, very, very bad, and what we need to realize is whether it's democracy or dictatorship, it hasn't actually worked for the Muslims. If you look at Bangladesh, where quite a number of years you had democracy, the so-called democracy, or Pakistan, you had a periods of democracy. Was it better than anything else? It wasn't. We had those people that came to power siphoning off the resources of the people, and also doing the bidding for the foreigners.
What if somebody argues that when democracy will only work when the subjects also understand democracy and they account the person that they've chosen? So again,
in Bangladesh, I tell you, the people understand that. We have hortals, which is a natural phenomenon of democracy, where the people actually go to the street and stop the government working. This is the real democracy, even closer to democracy as in real sense than in this country, where you just let the parliament decide. The thing is, for us, for the Muslims, in the Muslim world, it hasn't worked. Which country, through democracy, managed to advance in any way in terms of the people achieving what they believe, taking the people with them. What are our beliefs? Muslims believe in the worship of Allah Ta'ala, believe in justice, believe in taking Islam through the rest of the world, because that's the best for the rest of the world. People are suffering, not only in the Muslim world, all over the world. Look at the economic collapse of 2008, where huge resources have been taken. Look at how the world is divided amongst the rich and the poor. People all over the world are suffering, and the worst suffering is in the Muslim world. And none of these things, whether it's dictatorship or democracy, the so-called democracy, hasn't saved the people, hasn't removed the misery of the people. Obviously, we need to start thinking, okay, if that hasn't happened, what else is there? What other alternative is there? Is there an alternative for the Muslims? And what you find is the leadership have a certain way of doing things, and the people have a different way of doing things. Unless the leadership and the people are in harmony, moving in the same direction, how will you ever get improvement?
How will that ever happen?
You will not get improvement.
We have another question from one. Probably we just like to intertwine that, which is how do we remove dictators? Look at what Assad is doing in Syria. It almost looks impossible. If removed, he would be replaced by another. So, looking at Syria and what you're saying, it's like, the Muslims on the ground want to move Assad, but clearly there are foreigners, foreign interest there, and they're ready to put their people of interest in that land. So how will the Muslims make an effect to this situation, whether in Syria or Bangladesh or Pakistan? Obviously, I haven't heard anything practical so far where really the Muslims can engage in a certain sort of method to bring back something that they want.
First of all, what I would say is that Muslims need to be cultured in politics and ideology. They need to be educated in these areas, and they need to on the ground. The people need to change. They need to understand their politics as well. They need to see the wrongs. They need to see the corruption, see through all these facade. That's the first point. The second thing is that they need to make clear demands. And this is what's happening. It is becoming a growing call.
I think the biggest issue is to try and remove the foreign influence. To say, look, we will decide our own destiny. Because a lot of these problems are coming in because of the foreign influence. Yeah, foreign leaders, foreign nations. We're looking to America, we look to Britain for guidance, for direction, and for influence. The thing is, what we say is grassroots. The people, decide what's best for us, what's best for the people, what's best for the nation. We need to start thinking like that. We need to propagate that amongst the influentials. Without the influentials, without the people at a certain level, these foreign powers cannot have influence in those lands. You see, there is no direct colonial influence in those countries. They are done by proxies. The proxies are our people from within the nations. And we need to expose these proxies, to say that these are proxies of Western nations. These are proxies of these capitalist nations, and they're doing the bidding of those nations. And what needs to happen is the people, a leadership needs to rise from the people in terms of their aspirations and what they value as important. And what you find is the people value Islam, the Islamic lifestyle, the Islamic way of life as the most important.
But wouldn't you say, because we've seen, we discussed the Arab Spring. We're talking about if you look at Pakistan, for example, if you look at Uzbekistan, if you look at Bangladesh, we find the prisons are just full of political prisoners. People that are not violent, people that are making simple, clear demands, people that are simply exposing these agencies that are being, rounded up, put into prisons, tortured, and banned, and all the rest of it. And then the government-sponsored media are, defaming these people and trying to sort of
media blackout,
creating confusion amongst the public. about what the reality is, because their position now, this is what we need to look at. Their position is becoming a desperate position, a situation. They find themselves in a desperate situation, where people have sussed out their evils, their agencies. So, and this is what needs to grow. This is the sort of momentum that we need to push and grow to, and inshallah we will see that there are sincere people amongst the people of influence, people of power, that really need to respond to the call of the people, because that's what it's become. It's become the call of the people, and inshallah people of power will respond.
Okay, let's go back to history. You mentioned a bit about history, going back about 200-300 years. Maybe we'd like to go back more than that. We know Muslims were ruled with the Islamic system for over 1300 years. This was known as the Khilafah. Some would argue that this was also dictatorship.
I'd like to make one point on this. I mean, yes, it could be argued. I mean, I wouldn't say that the entire period of the Islamic rule was rosy.
Yeah.
But first point would be that if you actually compare the entire period, all right, and a few incidents that or few sort of like small periods where things did happen that were seen as problematic, or instability and whatnot. Yeah, these are so few and far apart. Whereas if you compare it to our period, this last century, if you compare it to this last century, the sort of problems and chaos and death and destruction that we have seen just in this last century, really, it's just beyond, it's not comparable. Do you see? So that's the first point. We're talking about a 1300-year period, all right, where a few isolated, I would say these are few isolated sort of like events and issues and situations that the Ummah faced. Yeah. Compared to just this last century, it's
there
nothing.
Is no comparison.
That's the first point. And the second point is, all right, yes, there were some khalifas that were possibly despotic, right? They were probably, not, very welcome by the whole population. There were problems, but let's put it into context. Let's try to understand it. Firstly, they were ruling by Islam, in the sense that the system, the ideals, the values, the laws, these were Islam, and the people had already agreed to Islam. They may be clinging on to power. That was where the problem was.
Yeah.
They're clinging on to power, but the issue is the masses at large were actually not so affected by it. Do you see? So at top level, there were maybe power struggle, there were skirmishes or wars or
yeah.
But the masses, the public at large, they weren't really suffering as a result. So these are yeah.
Even though they were power hungry,
yeah. So
they knew to look after the honor and dignity of their subjects.
Exactly, and that's the other point. The other point is they were not influenced by foreign powers. They were independent, even though they may have been despotic to some extent. You can't compare these khulafa to the tyrants of today. You can't compare them. Do you see? So yes, we don't want to paint a beautiful rosy picture of our history and pretend that nothing wrong ever happened. Right, but that's besides the point. The point is they were still independent. The subjects were still not affected by their corruption, and so at large the people were satisfied with the law and order and the system that was in place.
So
I'd like to just add
to
that. You have to understand the Khilafah system and the imperialist system, which is even going on now. It change in terms of name, in terms of capitalists. We call it capitalists, basically. Yeah. And you can see the contrast, the difference. If you look at the British colony, where they were around to different lands, just exploiting the resources, and the only important people were those people who were living in the island, the Great Britain island. Those were the important people. So the indigenous people in India can suffer through famine, or in Ireland they can suffer. That's not a problem. These kind of things. Whereas if you contrast that to the Islamic system, in terms of the Khilafah system, which was not exploiting any of the region that it went and ruled over. Yeah. It was in fact giving to those places, taking justice, and it's all about justice, and it's about the rule. That's really it. Yeah, so, that's the difference.
So one of the questions from our listeners is Islamic rule gives all the power to the ruler. So is this not dictatorship? I mean, maybe there is a method to define a dictatorship, and probably you can enlighten us on how the Khilafah operates.
So this is the difference between a Khilafah and a dictatorship. A dictatorship rules according to their whims and desires. So you can say a parliament is actually a dictatorship. It's a group of people dictating exactly what they feel in terms of their rule. Yeah, so they do according to their whims and desires. Whereas in Islam, the Khalifa is not above the rules that apply to everyone, which is the rule of Allah Ta'ala. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is the Supreme. Our Lord is the Supreme, and the laws that came from that through the Quran, Sunnah, Ijma' Sahaba, that's the Supreme. So you cannot, as a leader, make a rule that goes against those principles. Whereas in a democracy or even dictatorship, you can, because you are the Supreme.
So hang on a minute. You say obviously, but what is the viewpoint of a non-Muslim in an Islamic society?
So on that basis, whether it's a Muslim or non-Muslim living in that citizen can take the leadership into court and maybe even have them impeached if they went against any of these established rules that are there. If you like the Constitution, they couldn't do that. Yeah, it's not possible to make a law that goes against that. Yeah, and they would be impeached. And if they didn't do any of the things that they are meant to do in terms of looking after the citizens, then again they could be accounted for that. Yeah, and it doesn't require Muslim or non-Muslim. Any citizen can do that. Everyone's a citizen within the state in terms of the law. Whereas the dictatorship is one man. It could be one man or a group of people. They always have advisors. Yeah. So what's the difference between let's say the British Parliament, where they decided to go to war in Iraq, even though the people were totally against it? Or let's take the Brexit issue. People have chosen Brexit. Yeah. But the Parliament decides, oh, okay, I'm going to decide. I'm supreme. Yeah. So what's the difference between that and a dictatorship? There's no difference. 1 man or 10 men. It's the same thing.
I mean, living in Britain, for example, we're classed as ethnic minorities if we're from, if our forefathers were from Bangladesh. Non-Muslims in the Islamic State, how will they be viewed? Like ethnic minorities? Just wanted this curiosity to see, will we honor them better than how we are honored living in this society?
No, this is the thing. So if you look at in a democracy, it's a majority decide who's going to be ruling, and therefore it's always for the people that are ruling in their interest to look after the majority and not the minority, and that is a problem. Whereas in Islam, the people, everyone's a citizen, and even the minorities are given certain rights even the state can't take away.
So the Khalifa cannot take these rights away because he's decided on a new law or a new principle, like we have in the United States, for example. Now the Muslims need to be registered, and because
in Islamic society, what you're suggesting, there wouldn't even be such a discussion, would there?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, yes, non-Muslims would be identified, and they will have slightly different rights and responsibilities.
One that sometimes suits them, I suppose, as
well.
It's
in fact, it's more to their advantage, actually.
Yeah.
Contrary to what a lot of critics like to point out. Like, for example, they are exempt from serving in the army, for example.
Okay.
Do you see? They're exempt from serving in the army because it's not their responsibility. They are under the protection of the Muslims, meaning the Muslims are responsible for their lives, for their property, for their honor, and all the rest of it. Yeah. So where they're not responsible. Do you see? So even on taxation matters. In fact, as far as this is from what I heard, is that they actually pay less in tax in total compared to the Muslims. You see, so the Muslims have a greater responsibility and a burden compared to non-Muslims, because so
we ain't got much time. We've got about 8 minutes left. My final sort of question maybe I want to ask you, brothers, was yes, we talked about the problems in the Muslim lands, and we slightly touched on what Muslims can do. I mean, what are the practical steps Muslims can take in the Muslim countries to resolve their issues and bring back a just system?
I mean, the point I would want to sort of emphasize, without going into too much detail. The point is, Muslims first of all need to boycott and reject the current system, because this is where the Muslims are tripping. What they find is that once they get involved in the process and the system that is currently in operation, they need to realize that they're already in the trap of the foreign powers that control through these systems their affairs. And until and unless we boycott and reject these current systems that are in place, right, it's just not going to work. I mean, this is the point I want to emphasize. And secondly, of course, we need to be very clear in terms of what our values, our systems, our laws should be, our relationship should be, and where the source of our legislation and our governance and order needs to be. And it is obviously Islam in the Muslim world. It is obviously Islam, and this is where we need to really look into, and we need to rally the masses to establish correct political parties that do think independently, that think outside the box. Because at the moment, these systems are boxing the Muslims in. And it's within these boxes that Muslims are, trying to find a solution. And like Brother Karo has explained, that it's, over decades, we're still in this box, and we're finding it impossible to come out of it.
No change.
Well, what I would say is, in the Muslim world, people are struggling to, get the daily bread, daily food on the plate. Yeah. So they have very little time to think. Most of our listeners are in Western world. They have huge time to think, huge time to know exactly what's going on, to have access to the news. In Muslim countries, a lot of them don't have access to the news. We have this ability. We can see exactly what's going on in the world. We can see how our lives here is dependent on the exploitation of all of those other regions. And if we have, some goodness within us, we have relationship back home. We have relationship in Pakistan. We have relationship in Bangladesh. Yeah, we need to raise those kind of discussions with them, and we need to tell them they need to look for their own independent thinking without following, the West, without seeing the West as the beacon, as something that they want to achieve. And we need to push that amongst those who are influential. We've got contacts within with those who are military, within the parliament. It doesn't matter who they are. We have those who have power to change things. Yeah, we have that. We have the ability. We need to speak to them. We need to have discussion with them.
The force against what you're saying is humongous, I would say, because just a little sensation I had when I was in Bangladesh a little while ago, what the kids, their curriculum, the national anthem, the patriotism, the asabiya, the way it is ingrained, indoctrinating in the society. One good thing was having a little discussion with youngsters of 14, 15. They don't like it. But, what happens, I'm sure you're aware, once you tell a lie day in, day out, it becomes like the truth. So how are you going to work against this curriculum?
This type of culturing is specifically designed to really break the Muslims into sections and parts and keep divided so that they can exploit and achieve their goals. If you look at the situation in Burma now, for example, now I want to pose a question to the listeners and yourself. You tell me, the people of Bangladesh, are they or are they not willing to support the people of Burma that are being massacred today? Tell me, are they not crying and demonstrating and feeling for these people that are being massacred today? Yes, they are. But now I ask the question, do the ruling class feel the same way? Do the ruling class feel that they need to raise awareness, raise concern, protest against what is happening there? Where is our army? Where are the armies there to liberate these people, to help these people? Are you telling me that people of Bangladesh would not help those people who are being slaughtered, and butchered by these Buddhist fanatics? Look what's happening in Kashmir. Are you telling me the Muslim Ummah don't care for these people in Kashmir? Why is it that our ruling class have nothing to say on this matter? Why are Pakistani army just sitting there watching, spectating what's happening across just a mile into Kashmir? What's happening? How can we truly say that these people are our representatives? Can we truly say that these people are there for us and they care for us and they're there to represent us? So when they call us at this time of election and this and that, shouldn't we really ask the fundamental? What representation? What representation? We saw no representation over the last period. Why are you here to us? Do you see? So Muslims really need to work to, create this representation, this political representation that will truly feel for what they feel for and truly care for what they care for. And that is the only time we can really, move forward in the world today.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, brothers.
Can I just a couple of points I'd like to make? Because
last
it seems
point.
like the Muslim world is in a dismal situation. I would like to just try and put some light at the end of the tunnel, if you like. Yeah,
Inshallah.
I mean, the Muslim world, we can see, is slowly progressing towards Islam, and the Arab Spring is an example of it. And all over the Muslim world, there is an uprising in terms of thought, in terms of the thinking, that really, do they want to be part of this, so-called democracy where we saw in America, people like Donald Trump gets elected, and then, how the Muslims are second-class citizens, whether in Europe or America, and these dictatorships or democracy hasn't done anything. If you look at the refugees, mostly they are coming from where? The Muslim world. So the situation in the Muslim world is really bad. But if you look at history under the Khilafah system, it was very, very progressive nation where, whether it's innovation, technological innovation, or cultural or literal innovation, it all was within the Muslim world. And inshallah, I can see that beacon in light where in future we have that system back in place for the Muslims, and we are those people that the world is looking to for solutions for mankind, for their problems.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, Brother Abdul Samad and Brother Khairul Islam. Next week we will be inshallah discussing Burma, so inshallah do join us next week. And we're going to end it here. Please do follow us at Twitter at Middle Path Radio, and Jazakallah khair to our listeners for tuning in. Inshallah, we will be back next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Middle Path Radio, your source of Islamic knowledge.